Right, well, I'll kick off. So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar from iFol, in which we're going to be discussing some best practice skills that you're going to need to help avoid your risk of accounts payable fraud in 2025. Now, fraud hits every business hard. An iFol report last year found 65% of respondents said they either knew of a company or individual who become a victim of AP fraud in the last 5 years. Now, there's a bit of a perfect storm on the horizon when it comes to AP fraud. So there's increasing levels, but also a rise in things like deepfake technology being used by scammers. So we are at a bit of a crossroads in the industry at the moment. But the good news is we've got a fantastic panel of experts today from around the world to help you prepare, give some tips and some guidance, and help you reduce the risk of becoming a victim. But we do want to hear from you too, please. So don't wait until the end of the webinar to send in your thoughts. So we're asking if you can have a little think and get in touch with us and ask what is the most outrageous claim that you've seen submitted? So have a little think about that. What's the most outrageous claim that you've seen submitted? Uh, and as we're going along, put in your answer and add them to the chat. So my name is Jay Viderlingham, and as I said, we're really lucky today to be joined by an international panel of experts. From the Netherlands, I'll just go around and introduce everyone. We've got Jolanda Maten, I hope I pronounced that correctly, AI and blockchain expert for the European Commission and international keynote speaker. Now, she helps organizations to understand AI's impact with a focus on ethics and innovation. From the UK, we've got Louise Graham, financial operations consultant. Now, Louise has spent more than 30 years working in the sector for organizations such as Santander, Costa Coffee, and the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office. So plenty of experience. And from the US, we've got Connie Hoen, Director of Global Audit Services at SAP Concur, which is our sponsor today. And she's an expert on all things auditing and non-compliance, more than 35 years of expertise in expense management. So a wealth of experience that we've got for everyone here. So let's dive straight in then and talk a little bit, set a bit of context, I suppose, about why AP fraud is on the rise. Connie, first, what's your thoughts on the issue at the moment?
I think it really has a lot to do with, opportunity. Employees may feel a little bit more entitled. There's employees that are working from home. There's a hybrid situation, and now there's employees coming back to the office. So, again, we're seeing across the board organizations looking at their travel and expense policies and trying to define, are we too generic? Do we need to be more specific? Looking at the compliance checks and the results they're getting out of those compliance checks. What are they finding, and how do they fine tune then their travel and expense policy activities? So I just think it's the opportunity. Employees are looking at what opportunities. It definitely is an area being identified as non-compliance.
Okay. Louise, what are your thoughts and why you think AP fraud is on the rise?
Well, first of all, I think some of it is internal fraud, collusion, opportunity, as Connie said. But I think also it's quite organised these days, I think. These are organisations who are throwing lots of stuff at trying to defraud organisations, and if only a certain percentage of it sticks, that's still worth doing. So I think, you send out 1,000 emails and you automate them, and actually you've only got to have a few people click on some big amounts, and it's been worth your while to do that. So I think it's got easier for people to defraud organisations because of technology over the last sort of 20 years, I would have said.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, so Yolanda, what are your thoughts on the current state of AP fraud?
Yeah, well, I think that Louise said it really well. Like Connie said, there is a lot of fraud from the inside, but there is also especially a lot of fraud from the outside nowadays because of the technology that makes it possible. And I think the AP is really a number one target for fraudsters because they really handle large routine transactions, which makes it really perfect for social engineering. And social engineering is, instead of hacking a system, you hack the human trust. And you can use a lot of technology to hack human trust. So I think we need to have a good vision on what technology we are using to protect ourselves, because actually it's the same technology that hackers are using to get into the system.
Yeah, and that's a really the human trust thing there is really key, I think, and a lot of what we come down to is people wanting to find answers, I suppose, as to what they can do, practical things, steps they can do to actually avoid becoming victims. So, with that in mind, I suppose, what steps do you think people can take to reduce the risk of internal and external fraud? And let's go to Louise first on this one.
Okay, so thank you. I've got a few thoughts on that really. Um, A good procure to pay system with purchase orders is really important. And I think a lot of big organizations have that. And some real basic stuff like enforcing segregation of duties. So the same person shouldn't be able to set up a supplier, add an invoice, approve an invoice, and make a payment. And if you haven't got that segregation in your system, you should have, because that's an open door. And then I think also it's about training and empowering accounts payable professionals, and making it really clear to them it is totally fine to not make a payment if you're at all concerned that it's not legitimate. And actually, there won't be any consequences of that, because actually, we'd rather you didn't pay something that you should have paid than the other way around, than make a payment to somebody fraudulently.
Yeah. So, Yolanda, I suppose when it comes to technology, I mean, what can people be doing here in terms of reducing their risk?
Well, I think prevention is not just a technology issue. It's really the human issue. Like I mentioned before with the social engineering, it all comes down to awareness. So when you look at training, I think the awareness of what the technology is, what the technology is capable of doing when it's in the wrong hands, that's what people should learn about, because AI-driven fraud is really getting more and more sophisticated. And if you have really well-trained employees, that's really the best line of defense, I think. You need people that understand what a phishing email could look like, that a phishing email nowadays is a lot harder to discover than it was maybe, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years ago. People need to be trained in that.
Okay. And Connie, what are your thoughts there? What steps can people be taking to reduce the risk?
You know what, and both Louise and Yolanda have had great call outs. The AI driven fraud, absolutely. I think from my standpoint, looking at having a solid travel and expense policy is key. Then again, training, making sure your employees understand what should they be following or what shouldn't they be submitting on an expense report. And then that third check is to have a compliance program, making sure your employees are following that, with wrapping up on reporting, making sure you're seeing the success of your travel and expense compliance program. But I also want to call out, the technology is definitely there. Technology, the AI ML technology. However, I have found that having humans still involved in that process helps. Again, the technology may call out margarita pizza as non-compliance. Well, we all know margarita pizzas are great, but they're not alcohol. So again, helping the technology get smarter and smarter is where we all have a huge role as well.
Yeah, I mean, just interesting to sort of play on that because, as you say, there are some things that a computer system, an AI system might trip up on, as you said, like Connie, a word with two potential meanings. Yolanda, are we at a situation now where this is still a problem, or is things like AI becoming more and more adaptive as we go on?
Well, I think the real problem with AI is not so much the technological part, it's the training part of AI. Like Connie mentioned already, the machine learning that we're talking about, AI is trained on data. And we humans are the ones to supply the data to the AI to be trained on. So if we feed it with data that we think is correct, but it may have some bias in it, then we are training it on biased data and it will just exponentially grow. And that's not what you want, because then you will have a system that we don't understand anymore why it's reasoning like that. So I absolutely agree with Connie. It's getting boring. We all agree with everybody, but it's really true. It's all about the data. If you have data, you need really a diversity of people to have a look at the data to see if it's correct from different points of view, because that's really absolutely the basics of AI. If you train it on data that has some bias in it, it will only make the system less and less reliable. And that's really a big issue nowadays.
Sure. And Louise, any other thoughts on this before I can move on to the next point?
No, but I just think this the human aspect is really important. And I was thinking about this a phishing attempt that I know of. Actually, if you'd really delved into it, it probably was obviously a phishing attempt, but the email had been forwarded around the organization, and that gives it legitimacy because actually anyone just skimming down is going to go, oh, yeah, that's from within my organization. I don't need to be worried about that, and isn't necessarily going to check every email address along the chain. So, you know, I know I keep saying it and we all keep saying it, but humans are really important and we're the biggest risk factor there is for fraud.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I suppose when it comes to things like do's and don'ts, when verifying kind of vendor details and making payments, some practical things that people can put in place. I mean, if you guys had to think about things that people definitely should be doing and things that definitely they shouldn't be doing, I suppose let's go to Yolanda on this one first.
Well, what they should be doing, they should report it if they have some kind of feeling that maybe there is something wrong with the email, because that way they can also prevent it from spreading further and further. Another thing they should be doing is always be checking if the email is coming really from the sender that it says that it's coming from, because that's where a lot can go wrong. When you look at AI, it's about really training the system in the correct way. That's what I mentioned already before. So it's really about what kind of data am I going to use to train this AI system? And many people think that training an AI system is some very technical job, but it isn't, because we all use data. And everybody, each of us, they know from our own expertise what kind of data is relevant to check and what kind of data is not relevant to check. So we all have our own expertise. Even the pizza maker knows that in a pizza margherita there is no alcohol. So also the pizza maker is involved in training AI systems with that knowledge that he or she has.
Okay, great. Connie, what are your thoughts then? Do's and don'ts on this?
I want to echo everything that Yolanda was just talking through, but being able to um, keep those two together, the technology and the humans, is really where I see our technology becoming stronger and stronger. I love trying to break the system. So our data scientist teams here at SAP Concur I meet with them all the time, especially when we're finding things that we know our technology should be stronger. Again, coming up, I have so many different examples running through my head, but it's, as you were saying earlier, everybody here, the technology is the technology, and it's a strong technology because of the humans. We've built it to be. And so we need to continue every single day adding more information to our technology so that every day it is stronger, because we do have people trying to break the system all the time. It's just not the fun trying to break the system with Connie, but it's people are really trying to break the system. So it definitely is where we are part of that equation of our technology.
Okay. And Louise, any thoughts, do's and don'ts, things that people definitely should be doing or should be avoiding?
Yeah, anybody who's ever worked with me knows that I am big on make the phone call to check the bank account details if somebody asks you to change the bank account. I'm going to give you two examples that have happened in my career. So one was a supplier to whom we'd made a major payment, millions of pounds every week, and they had somebody looking into it being in their bank account, breaking into their email account rather. Breaking into their email account, looking for somebody who paid large amounts, and they sent a very, very realistic looking letter. The right CFO, the signature looked legit, the company registration number was fine. Everything was really great about this letter. And it came into the accounts payable inbox, and luckily, brilliant accounts payable manager in my team said, "Oh, I'll just make the phone call to the person I know." So, not using the phone number on the letter, phoned the person they knew, and it was a fraudulent attempt to change the bank account. There was a payment of £2 million due that week. So had that bank account change been made, the payment of £2 million would have been made. The organisation would have lost the £2 million. the fraudulent people, the criminals, would have gained £2 million, and we wouldn't have been insured against it because there isn't any insurance for this stuff at the moment. So, which I think is another conversation, but very interesting that you can't insure for this. And then I've got another example of, again, bank account details changes. And this was a financial controller who thought he was going to get sacked, actually. And it was a long email chain about lots of boring stuff. Um, and in the middle of it, there was oh, hey, by the way, Steve, can you just change our bank details? It's this. And because it was in the middle of a chain, and it looked really legit because it was in the middle of a chain with loads of people on it who weren't interested in that bit, Steve read that, changed the bank details, didn't make the phone call, just believed it because it was a long email chain with an external supplier, changed it, and we lost 15 grand. So it was only 15 grand, but it was still 15 grand. It's still a lot of money. He thought he was going to get sacked. He did not get sacked, but he did learn, make that phone call. Because had he made that phone call, his supplier would have said, I'm not on that email chain, mate. And I didn't ask you to do that. So,
Okay. So human intervention, whenever you can, at some point in the chain, can
yeah,
help things.
100%.
Um, Great. Well, I mean, we have spoken a little bit about AI already, and but as a tool, it's something that is used um, by both hackers and by people who are trying to avoid the hacking, I suppose. So, Yolanda, I was just going to come to you a little bit and talk about the technology, and I think you've got some examples of where people have used AI to either subvert our thinking or kind of change the way that things are seen. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I think I know what example you mean. Um, like you said, AI can be used for the good and for the bad, of course. And the way AI works, it's that it's recognizing patterns and it's detecting anomalies. I'm sorry, it's a very difficult word if you're not English.
Anomalies.
Yes, that one. So AI is very good at recognizing patterns, and that, of course, is used by the machine learning. So, for example, if you drive an autonomous vehicle, and it has this computer vision, which means that it's using vision to recognize things that it sees. And there was this stop sign, and an autonomous vehicle can recognize the stop sign and know that it has to stop because it has learned that that's how it works. If you have really smart hackers, they know exactly at which points in the stop sign the AI is looking to determine whether it's a stop sign or whether it's something else. And these hackers take advantage of these points by putting maybe very small dots on the physical spot sign, very small, maybe small labels, or maybe with a pen or something. They put some small black dots on particular places on this stop sign, knowing that this will manipulate the machine learning of the car into thinking that it's actually a 60-mile-per-hour sign. So imagine the impact of that. And now you say, okay, I don't have an autonomous vehicle. I don't care. I don't have that problem. But if this can be used with autonomous vehicles, it can also be used with financial transactions. It can be used with anything. If hackers understand how the machine learning is working, then they can also manipulate it. And this is actually a very scary thought. This is what we call adversarial attacks. And there are a lot of these examples. There's also an example where there's a certain pattern on a t-shirt. And if a person is wearing that kind of t-shirt, it will not be recognized by an AI system as a person. So facial recognition will not work in that case. You can look up these examples. When you search for adversarial attacks, you will find these kind of examples, even where Google thinks that a picture of a cat is actually a picture of an avocado. It sounds really stupid, but if you manipulate the right points within the AI machine learning, it can actually be, it can have an outcome that is really undesired. So this is actually very dangerous and it sounds so scary, but you must know that, of course, also the people on the good side are working very hard on finding these crimes, because that's what they are, of course, and to do everything they can to prevent them and to stay ahead of the cyber criminals.
Yeah, and it's such a difficult area to be in, as Louise said, with her example about always make the phone call. Things like deep fake technology and voice cloning are kind of things now. So it's
Yeah,
even harder, I suppose, to stay on the right side of things, isn't it?
it is. But on the other side, like you say, it's evolving. AI is evolving all the time, so the fraudsters are using it as well, with all kind of deep fake voices and everything. But on the other side, you can use also AI to improve the learning with that, to improve the system, because you will have more examples of what is deep fake and what is not deep fake. And AI on our side, on the defensive side, will also get smarter and smarter and probably detect deep fake earlier and earlier.
Okay, so Connie, in terms of fighting the good fight, if you like, using AI, can you think of anything that that you can kind of contribute here in terms of how to sort of use AI to stamp out the bad guys?
Absolutely. So with SAP Concur's audit services, we have two different options. We have an audit process that uses the technology and then our audit teams to be able to help with the compliance checks of the expense reports being submitted by 6,000 different organizations. In addition, we also have a service that uses the AI technology that allows your internal teams to do some help with that. And so again, being able today to have an auditor look 10,000 times for, is the date correct? They no longer need to do that because we're using that technology. Now that auditor can focus more on the non-compliance activities that are being identified. They can take deeper dives into what's happening here. Do I see any patterns? Is the technology telling me about some patterns that I should be looking at, whereas before I didn't have time to? So we're really able to do more with less in this process. And I know that is kind of one of the struggles with everybody. How do we do more with less? Where that to me is where our technology is definitely coming in and saving our day. I called out maybe earlier with the margarita pizza process, but it also is helping us identify those needles in the haystacks that we might not have identified in the past as a non-compliant activity. So it both sides, it's a win-win for us.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting when you talk about non-compliance there rather than fraud, I suppose. And I think some of this comes down to potentially intent, doesn't it? Is somebody intentionally trying to get something that doesn't belong to them, or is it something that they are, self-justifying, if you like, and thinking, actually, I do deserve this to write this one off.
Right?
What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I say non-compliance because I don't know, is this a new employee? And they really haven't tested or, been certified through their travel and expense policy yet, but they had some expenses to submit. Maybe they didn't know they couldn't submit a coach purse as a laptop bag. Or is it that they are really trying to work the system and they're attaching a photo of their family pet because the technology is saying you need to attach a receipt here. So they're attaching a photo of their family pet for their $10,000 transaction that they really didn't want to show the real receipt for. That's where the technology and humans both come together to be able to identify the non-compliance. Then we work with the organization and they get to work with the employee and their HR teams when there's huge non-compliance things identified. I have a quick story and I promise it'll be quick, but we did have an employee that on their corporate card, they had a transaction for a cruise, 2 tickets on a cruise. That employee was then their leadership through reporting identified it. They brought the employee in and the employee's like, I didn't do this. They happened to be an employee at a small florist shop. Well, here what had happened is one of the employees had written down the credit card information as a client was submitting it over the phone. They took that credit card, immediately booked a cruise for her and her boyfriend for that following weekend. Well, because of the reporting and the fast turnaround of these non-compliance things, the authorities were able to meet them on the port before they got onto the cruise. And the employee at that florist said, I didn't think we would get caught this fast. So she knew she was doing something wrong, yet she continued to do that process, knowing that she's going to more than likely lose her job, if not further things. But yes, people feel entitled. People feel, I don't know what goes through their minds, but I love that we have those fraudsters out there because I'm going to have my job forever.
I suppose, yeah, you're always going to be employed, aren't you? As long as there are people who think that way. Louise, any thoughts on this in terms of the human intent, if you like, to defraud, or is it just
Yeah,
non-compliant?
I think expense auditing is really important. I think if people know expenses are being audited regularly and they know there are some consequences for non-compliance, where it is willful non-compliance rather than accidental non-compliance, then I think they're more likely to do the right thing and keep within the policy. I think your policies need to be really unambiguous because I think if there's any ambiguity, people will exploit that. I didn't know I couldn't buy a puppy because it didn't say I couldn't buy a puppy as an extreme example, but I have seen some outrageous claims for, to give you an example, and I won't say the organisation, but very, very expensive bottles of wine claimed because somebody was in an area where there had been an earthquake, a really minor one, didn't affect them at all. But their reasoning was, I really needed to drink some expensive wine because I'd been in this earthquake. The CFO thought differently and called them in for a robust conversation about that, and they were made to repay the amount. And that story will have gone around the organisation and people will have been made aware that expensive bottles of wine, no matter your situation, you can have them if you want, but you pay for it yourself. So yeah, so I think you need good policies. I think they need to be unambiguous. I think you need to enforce them. And I think it gets around when you start calling people in and questioning them. Why did you think this was okay? I think that sort of gets out there generally.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is down to business culture, isn't it? And in terms of how people perceive what the threats are and as you say the consequences on this. Um, just interested in all of your opinions really in terms of where we are in terms of business culture when it comes to AP fraud. Do you think there is a reluctance sometimes on the behalf of organizations to admit that they have been victims? Let's go with, I don't know, Yolanda, what are your thoughts on this first?
Yeah, I think there's some kind of feeling of shame, maybe, or I don't know what it is, but people, when they click on a phishing mail, for example, they are afraid to report it because maybe they will get punished for it. They will get some bad remarks for it. They will be judged. How could you click on that? Couldn't you see that it was a phishing mail? There will be thoughts like that, or at least the people thinking that other people will think about them like that. And as long as that persists, then it will be very difficult for people to show that it's okay to make mistakes. An organization should have a culture where you can admit that you made a mistake, because then not only you, but the entire organization could learn from it and could benefit from it. And it's very easily said and much easier said than done. I know that from the projects that I did for change management within organizations. Theoretically, everybody understands it and everybody says, yeah, we should do it like that. But when it comes down to what really happens in day-to-day life, you see that it's very difficult to do that. And AI can help us in preventing, well, at least in detecting fraud, maybe. But AI does not eliminate fraud. It will help us to detect the risks, but it's always the human that has to do it. It's also always the human oversight, the human decisions, the human collaboration. And that's why I always try to focus. So it's not so much about the technology. The technology is there, we can use it. But I'm very sorry to say the weakest link is always the human.
Sobering thought there. Yeah, Connie, what are your thoughts on business culture when it comes to fraud? And that point that Yolanda made there about shame. Is it seen as a shameful thing to have been a victim of fraud?
I'm going to date myself, but nobody wants their name in the newspaper in a negative tone. Everybody wants positive reinforcement about their organization out there. So I agree. It is a across the board, I would say companies would prefer not to see the non-compliance or fraudulent activities happening, or to at least say it's happening in their organization. But I can't imagine any company that actually has a strong travel and expense policy and compliance process can't see that there's some non-compliance out there. It's just, and as we said earlier, is it the human accidentally, unintentionally making this mistake, which can be fixed through training, or is it true non-compliance spend? But regardless, every organization, I strongly believe, should have a travel and expense policy and a compliance program to validate that what they're telling their employees they should be doing, they're actually following that process, and reporting to wrap it up to prove it. I mean, if you have reporting and you doing 100% review of all your reports and nobody's making mistakes, that is amazing. I haven't come across the organization yet that has that result, but again, that is our goal, is to get to that process where everyone's being compliant.
Sure, that's the kind of the city on the hill that we're all aiming for, I suppose. And Louise, your thoughts on business culture when it comes to this, and particularly someone who's worked across international um, organizations. Are there differing kind of standards that in terms of business culture that you've encountered when it comes to this?
Yeah, 100% definitely. So to give an example about the whole humans are the biggest at the Foreign Office. I worked for FCO services for a while. The thing that they drummed into us is the biggest security risk to this country is people. So it was, and that was a culture, a very strong security culture in that organization. So if you walked away from your computer without locking your screen, for example, that was considered a security breach and you might get points, and that led to, effects on your career. So that was a really strong security culture, as you would hope from the British Foreign Office, right? And then other companies, not necessarily so much in retail. In banking, again, quite a strong security culture. Santander, certainly. Walk away from your screen, you lock your desk. And I think you'll find that across the public sector and things like the police service and that kind of thing. So they've got a strong security culture. But I think there's still this huge embarrassment about fraud. And if you think about it, on the accounts receivable and billing side, companies have bad debt provision, don't they? They know that they're going to have doubtful debts and they have a provision for it, and they expect to have write-offs. On the accounts payable side, people don't expect it. I don't know why they don't, because it happens. 100% it happens. But people don't have a provision for fraud in their books. They don't admit to it. It's not widely spoken about because it is embarrassing, and you don't insure against it. So a lot of people, big companies have credit insurance, right? Somebody goes bust, you could claim on your insurance. Nobody has fraud insurance. To my knowledge, I'm happy to be corrected if that's not the case, but I've never heard of it. So I would say that's all quite interesting, actually, and creates an environment where it hasn't been, I don't know, talked about maybe as much as it should have been. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Joe,
Yeah,
but
no,
yeah.
it is interesting. I think just and go back to something that Connie said about, what people can kind of feel like they can get away with. Do you find it different when let's say it is a huge organization across different countries with things like alcohol, for example? Are there sort of cultural norms in different countries that people might think, oh, this is expected, I'll have, a couple of glasses of wine, three, four glasses of wine with dinner and expense it, or and other countries where that's just frowned on completely?
That to me, if that's to
Oh,
me,
yeah. Well, for all of you, I suppose.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, definitely. I mean, the Brits, we all think we can, the Brit expense claims are definitely, there's a higher kind of normality around a load of alcohol being fine. And why should the company pay for you to get drunk? I don't think that's appropriate in most organisations these days. It was back in the 90s, let's face it, but it isn't anymore. So yeah, I think that's relevant.
Yeah,
And
Connie, any
I would
thoughts?
echo that as well. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. For the organizations that we're auditing that are global as well, they do have different travel and expense policies by location. There's different regulatory requirements. There's different cultures. So one organization or one location within the same organization um, may or may not agree to reimburse employees for a specific activity, whereas in another location, it's natural. Everybody is following that process. So that's why it's great to have multiple different travel and expense policies, maybe have a core policy, but then uniquenesses depending on the location that their employees are located.
Yeah. And Yolanda, any thoughts on this, on kind of global companies and how they enforce this kind of thing across the board?
Well, from a cultural perspective, I think things have been said enough. But what I want to add to that is that this is also important data when you want to train an AI system, because you also have to train AI to be different across cultures. And that's a tricky thing if you're using one AI system. So that's something else that we as humans should think about. Again, this is the human input to technology that makes us important, that makes us as humans a key player in how AI will help us.
Sure. Okay, so that's really good. I think we kind of have managed to sort of sweep up a lot of these things now. So in terms of those, just want to kind of recap some of the things that we've talked about, just so that people in the audience can feel like they're actually getting this message. So the steps that people can take to reduce the risk of internal and external fraud. There, we sort of talked a bit about Louise. You mentioned segregation of duties, things like training and making sure that people are well trained and are up to date. Do you think that's a fair one in terms of steps people can take, everyone?
Mhm.
Yeah, let's go
Yeah,
to Yolanda on that. What do you think?
yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well.
Okay. In terms of do's and don'ts, a process was a big one as well. I think, Connie, you mentioned that, didn't you, about the non-compliance? So in terms of having processes in place, is that something that you think people should be doing more of?
Absolutely. I mean, training employees. Uh, Louise spoke earlier about the training on the phishing activities. Absolutely. Compliance is just as important, making sure employees are trained on their travel and expense policies. So, yes, I totally agree. Policies are definitely important around compliance.
Yeah, okay. And then and in terms of training as well, Louise, I mean, I think you've mentioned before that it's not something that's mandatory in lots of organizations. It's
Mm.
something you'd be calling for greater sort of
Yeah,
training.
yeah, absolutely. Do you know what? I've been thinking about this recently, and it's really interesting. I've run a lot of big AP departments. Fraud training is not standard in any of them. It would just haven't been. It's not a thing. It's not a thing. And I think since the GDPR in Europe, everybody does GDPR training. A lot of people do phishing training, and that's usually driven by the IT department. But actually, why don't we have fraud training as pretty standard for AP, not just like a one-off, just do it and that's your mandatory training done for the year, but a monthly tip or monthly refresher or quarterly refresher or whatever, because AP departments need to be on this. We've all talked about how one of the scariest things is the human element, right? And we're the biggest risk. And I just think I don't really understand why we're not doing it, other than it's not been taken seriously enough. People haven't had big losses and they think it won't happen to them. We talked about this before. They think it won't happen to them. So they wait till the horse is bolted, and then they go to shut the stable door and say, what about AP training? How did that happen? And I think, yeah, so I think training's really important. And also AP teams need to be really brave. And I think, as you mentioned, Yolanda, it needs to be okay to make a mistake. So you need to say to your AP teams, we will never mind if you say, no, I'm not paying it, to someone really senior, because we'd rather you caught a fraud than accidentally made a payment to somebody who was a criminal. So, yeah.
Yeah, so absolutely be cautious, and that's right. It's been borne out in the chat as well. Melissa Dearborn has said in the chat that training is key. So backing you up there, Louise. So just before we kind of wrap up, I'd like to just kind of go around the delegates and just get that one last piece of advice, I suppose, that you can kind of give to people. One takeaway piece of advice for the future here in terms of combating AP fraud. And let's also, who wants to go first? Does anyone want to go first, or I just pick
I'll
someone?
go first. I'll
Go,
go
Connie.
first.
Okay. Last takeaway piece of advice for people.
Again, step back, look at your process. Do you find any holes? What are you finding? Everybody should be finding something to change, especially around their expense report process, making sure that whatever they had in their travel and expense policy, whatever gaps they found or the non-compliance activities, that they go in and they fix those and then train the employees again on the whole process. It's just a circle process that just needs to be redone every single year. Staying ahead of those potential fraudsters. You have to be smarter and 2 steps ahead of everybody with technology and the human touch activities. Yep.
Okay, great. Yolanda, final thoughts, last piece of advice.
Yeah, well, I think technology can help us, but it's not enough. It must really be combined with employee training, especially on awareness, and also strong internal processes, like was mentioned. And what I would like to add to that is that compliancy is not about ticking boxes. It's about a mindset. It's about understanding why you're doing it. And the organizations that I talk to, the organizations where I also do, for example, cyber awareness trainings in programs, I see that they think too much because Louise said it well about the GDPR training. It's a training about ticking the boxes. It's a training, yes, we did the training, checking the box. But it's not like that. It's really about the awareness, about feeling it inside, about understanding what it's really about. And it's the same with AI. It's not about the technical part. It's about understanding what it's able to do and what it's not able to do, and where it needs our input and directions.
Sure, great. And Louise, the floor is yours. Final piece of advice for people. What do you want people to know about this and do differently?
So, final thoughts from me. Back to basics. Your procure to pay process and segregation of duties, all that really old-fashioned stuff. Um, it's really important. It's there for a reason. It's not just there as an annoying part of the process. It's really important. Embedding a culture, I think, is really important, and making sure your people can be brave. So I think accounts payable teams are brilliant. We know they're at the sharp end. We know they're under pressure. We know they're constantly being asked why things haven't been paid, and it's rarely their fault. We absolutely do know that. But actually, and fraudsters exploit that with creating a sense of urgency. This has got to be paid today, especially on a Friday. So they try and do it on a Friday so that it doesn't get discovered till the Monday. Then they're well away with your cash. So I think, you need to, accounts payable departments are already brilliant, hardworking people, but they need to be brave about challenging fraud or something that might look just a bit off. If it looks a bit off, it probably is.
Okay, yeah, be brave, and I think it speaks to something about being professionally curious, I suppose, doesn't it? It's sort of being brave enough to sort of put your hand up and go, I'm not sure this looks right, or something doesn't feel right. So, thank you very much, all of you, all of our guests today, and we'll just sort of wrap things up. Jolanda ter Maten there, AI and blockchain expert to the European Commission. Thank you very much for your insights. Connie Hoen, Director of Global Audit Services at SAP Concur, thank you very much for your time. And Louise Graham, Financial Operations Consultant as well. Thank you very much. All great insights and some fascinating guidance and tips. I hope you can all kind of go away and feel like you're empowered to act against AP fraud. So thank you very much. You can find a bit more information about what we've discussed today on the iFol website, along with information about iFol membership too. This webinar is also going to be available on the website too from later this week. So please go back and share it around for anyone who might have missed it. So thanks for your time today, guys. I'm Jay Viderlingham. Thank you very much and goodbye. See you at the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.